चेक 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 केबल सही है. हेलो चेक. उसमें नहीं आएगा. हेलो चेक 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 चेक. हेडफोन लगाओ ना एक बार. आ रहा. हेलो चेक 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 चेक. आ रहा ना. हेलो चेक. हेलो चेक चेक. ठीक है.
Also be included as qualification as qualified to be recruited as forensic scientists. So I would say that recruitment of forensic scientists, the rules and regulations are very strict, and if you want to modify, it takes a long time. Thank you.
नहीं ठीक है.
Oh, I think they can't. You can't record otherwise. Yeah.
Okay, okay. Hello. Hello.
So it's on. It's on.
Hello. Acha, on hai, okay. Yes. The second thing I wanted to say in terms of MHA response, nothing really that we know of has been done. There has been interest. We've made more, presentations thereafter to different bodies, but on ground, I don't know in terms of if anything's happening behind closed doors in terms of where the thinking is going. But what I do know is that there is a lot more interest, and there have been events which have been done with very high stakeholder groups on seriously thinking about the need for a statutory forensic science regulator. And those have been conversations that I've also been fortunate to be a part of, and so that seems promising. The other thing I would say from the FSIR that's been quite good to see is we put a annexure to the report itself, explaining very simply what is DNA profiling and what happens in DNA profiling. We've recently been able to, as part of our casework, cite that as material to show that all of these are things that should be presented along with the DNA report, right? So for legal professionals to be able to understand what are these different materials and what all should be given, so it's just another resource to go back to and look at. So that's been good. I just wanted to very quickly share two thoughts, both in terms of the challenges of doing this kind of work, and what was really a great learning opportunity for us as well. We thought that when we started the survey, we wanted to cover 61 labs. That would have been all the central and state labs in the country. We ended up covering half of that. So there were 30 labs that were covered in the survey. Through the 5 years that the project took to complete, 3 of those years was just data collection. And in that time period, we constantly were in touch with the labs, where many of them would tell us that, Madam, hamare paas time nahi hai aapko respond karne ka. Right? We don't have time to respond to to what you're saying, because many of the labs actually, before we speak to that is the dream, digitization and using AI and all other models. But the problem is, the reality is that many of the labs don't even actually have digital systems to have maintained their casework. Second, that the data across the labs is maintained in different ways. For instance, in one lab, the biology division, for instance, would be doing cases which are relating to checking of the origin of the blood group, as well as saying, whether is this O blood group, AB, right? So it's doing two different type of functions, right? It'll do what are known as analysis of what is this fluid and what is the grouping of that fluid, right? In some other labs, they would be in two different divisions. It will be biology and serology separately. Yeah. Now, why that creates a problem is because when you get all of this data as a researcher, you are unable to actually separate what is the pendency of our biology divisions, because one lab is doing different type of things under the division, right? And finally, what I wanted to just say because, in terms of, Lubiti's point really did get me thinking as well. And it is extremely challenging, right? Because one obviously feels that you are not trained in data, in many aspects of the data. But I've also come to realize that knowing the law intimately, I'm just gonna, I don't know if I'm doing this. Okay, knowing the law intimately and as a practitioner also can be helpful in some ways, because like recently we were trying to figure out how long does it in actuality, in implementation, how long does it take for samples to be sent to forensic science laboratories. And what we did was we scraped the data from Delhi eCourt's website. We know that judgments are not a good source for a lot of things, but they'll probably be a good source for us to be able to see what is the date on which the sample was collected during the postmortem or whatever procedure, and what was the date on which it was received by the lab. And that, so therefore knowing that as a practitioner and knowing how judgments are written can help you then shine light on these things as a researcher. So yeah, so I guess little hope there. Sorry.
I see you closely watching the time, so
Yeah,
I'll
because we have two more speakers and we need to have a Q&A after that as well.
I'll try to as quick as possible. So I hope that I got your names right. So Sarah, for the data value chain, that's just, with that I mean the overall thinking is applied to basically all kinds of data, how you process it. And we, like, as a kind of international team, we on the side of we err on the side of the more conservative approach, meaning we apply the more restrictive privacy laws when we publish data. Then Pavitra, more regular data, yeah, that would be amazing. And how to make data objective? For that, I think it's just that this conceptual clarity should be there. So what are the limitations of data? Oftentimes that's missing. And that goes into Suisa's point. We just need more data literacy, I would say. So if people are aware what the data, like what data quality is, and establishing data standards as well, things will improve. But we're on a path there. So I don't have a standard recipe for that. Data standards, and yeah, I think that's a good thing. Then we had this notion of qualitative versus quantitative data. To be honest, in my thinking, that's this distinguishing is not present so much. I think more about structured and unstructured data. So unstructured data for me would be text. And we can now work with that using machine learning. It's complicated, but we can do it. And then we have from that what other people would call qualitative data, we have then quantitative data. Yeah, Rupia, I think I get your point. So I started also as a physicist, and then I went into economics and data science, and now I'm at this intersection. It's to some extent always a pain, a little bit of an identity crisis, and I think you just have to live with that if you want to do this kind of interesting research or this kind of interesting work. You'll always be kind of the first person somewhere. But it's exciting, sometimes frustrating, but it's also exciting. And then Pooja, brief reaction. I think we as data scientists or whatever, we sometimes have the role of journalists. So we have to dig deep. The data is not there. We find ways to work with that data. For example, for our paper on judicial bias, there is a follow-up, or it goes along the line by Nivrika Jasal, who combined, for example, the court's information with first information reports. And I think there it's just like working with stakeholders, establishing institutional relationships. That's probably the key to getting more data, because that's what we need then. If you want to tell a story about something, you first have to get the data. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Christoph. Then the next two speakers that I'll call on stage, no, you just wait, because there'll be a Q&A at the end. Yeah, it's to talk about really different ways of thinking about this. Anshul from IIT Bombay will talk about systems design and the work that they have done using systems design in various contexts, including recent dabbling with the criminal justice system and using systems design there. And Mahesh, as from the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, on large-scale surveys and what it allows you to do and the challenges and the limitations. So I think it'll be very interesting to hear both of them, I guess, in ways that many of us are haven't really worked with in that sense. So Anshul and Mahesh, please.
So, can you connect this with the projector? So meanwhile, they are setting this up. I'll just introduce myself. So we are working at Technology and Development Cell at IIT Mumbai, where we involve in a lot of systems thinking and system dynamic modeling related work for the wicked problems. And some of the domains that we have been working in, understanding the antibiotic resistance, public versus private transport dynamics, and understanding how tragedy of common happen in the groundwater managements and stuff like that. And since last 1 year, we have been working in understanding the pendency of criminal justice system and applying systems thinking and system dynamic modeling approach. Today, the main focus is that we don't come with a subject matter expertise of justice systems, but what we bring here is how do you look at the different problems from a different angle and how the data and the different information, a lot of qualitative information and the narratives that we are talking about can be used to understand the systems in a better manner. Can we have the PPTs? Okay. So while it's loading up, I just want to do a quick and then we can have this thing. I have a bottle in my hand, right? I drop the bottle. If I ask you, what caused this bottle to be dropped? Gravity. Okay. Okay. Now suppose I had a helium balloon in my hand. What would have happened? It would have gone up. So where is the gravity now? So if you look for it, and basically it's not the gravity or it's not the my push of my hand or anything. It is the structure of that object in my hand that is causing its behavior. A different structure gave a different dynamics. Bottle gave a different dynamics, then a helium balloon will give a different dynamics. So my top and my focus of this thing is how we need to go beyond the data. Someone might be crazy enough to understand, how the bottle is falling, how its height is changing, how the helium balloon is rising, its height is changing. But what we have to understand, they can collect the data, but what we really essential we have to understand is what is driving those data. And that is the structural component to it. Okay. So that's what I was talking about. We need to go beyond data towards the structure. So in the justice system, if we talk about, there are different kind of data we can talk about. Cases are pending. You have a statistics about that. How the vacancy of judges are sort of stagnant over a period of time. Then there is a data around, institutional and disposal rates. How the trends are happening over a period of time. Then there is a data around the prison capacities and the population, and then how our prisons are overburdened, right? But if I have to ask you, what is driving this behavior? Are these different behaviors are interconnected? Is there any relationship between the prison population dynamics and the judges' dynamics or the pendency dynamics, right? Is this data enough to understand the functional aspect of the system? Or is just knowing these data points is enough and to design the solution. Then these insights might give us a point that this data is just a tip of an iceberg. There is a lot of structural component that is driving the behavior that is underlying this system. And I will come to this structure. So that's what I was just doing there, that structure is driving the behavior of a system. So in context of a justice system, when we say, or in any system, when we say the structure of a system, what we mean by is how the different parts of systems are interconnected, how the litigate system, advocate system, and judges systems, and other different systems are interconnected with each other, because no system is working in isolation, right? And then there are feedback dynamics. And by feedback dynamics, I mean one part, if A is affecting B, B is also affecting A. So that is a feedback mechanism that is existing in the system and which keeps the system in its place. To take an example, of under trial cases. So if you see the top left corner, where under trial cases, you can be understood as a function of disposal rate and the case institutionalization rate. And somebody might say that, okay, case disposal rate is a function of number of judges, argument time per cases, what is the judicial productivities, and all these things. And this has been a common argument over the period of times, where we are saying, okay, this is the linear relationship, where if you increase the number of judges, your under trial cases will decrease, or you somehow decrease the institutionalization rate, which is function of a crime rates, right? But what we also have to understood that there is a feedback dynamics over there, that when the judicial productivity is also a function of under trial cases itself, it is not in isolation. So when you have a more under trial cases, there are a lot of cases that are pending in the cases, which increases the context switching between the cases, a time that a judge has to spend between one case to another instance, which has an overhead, which we are calling as a context switching overhead, which actually decreases your productivity. So there is this feedback dynamics that is existing, and we have to understood these feedback dynamics. Similarly, on other hand, it might happen when the under trial cases are rising. Some people might have to spend a lot more time in the prison, and which might increase their probability of re-offending the offenses, and that's why they might do the repeat arrest and the case institutionalization rate. So there is another feedback dynamics that is existing there. So the crime rate might be in isolation, but the people who are in the jail, they can again become a part of the system by trapping into that loop, which we are calling as a repeat offenses. So all these dynamics is what we are saying, that from the data we have to understand these structural components, that how these dynamics are emerging. In morning, a lot of people, lot of panelists also quoted Professor Karthik, and I am taking one of his narrative that, when we do the modeling exercise, we take the narratives as an input. So one of the narrative, I would say that he said in the morning that poor people is an indicator of a government is a poor. Poor people means the government is a poor. If you have to understand this dynamics, you will understand that and what he said was that poor people leads to less tax versus GDP ratio, which leads to less expenditure capacity of the state, which again leads to less investment in the welfare, and which leads to more number of poor people, which means this poverty becomes a persistent phenomena. So there is no linear dynamics over there. There is always these feedback loops that is driving our systems, and we need to understand how, when we are saying one A is causing B, there is a high chances that B is also causing A. So that's the feedback dynamics that we are talking about here. And that's what we mean when we say understanding the structure of a system. So when you understand the system, it can tell you different dynamics. It can also make you enable about testing different scenarios. So in the previous example, there can be different data points. There can be data points about number of judges. There can be data points about argument time per cases. There can be data point about probability of repeat crime cases. With each data point, according to each data point, you can build your own dynamics, and you can test whether if I change my probability, what will happen in the system. If I change my argument time per cases, and anyhow, what will happen? If I fill my judges vacancy, if I increase my number of judges, what will be happen? So because of these dynamics, you can test various scenarios and develop your own stories by understanding these structures. Now question is, how do we represent these structures while in our work, and which is about different ways of looking at the data. So one way is the stocks. I'll just take a metaphor here. The stock, you can think of a whatever, in your house you might have a water tank on your roof, which is filled with the water. That is the stock, that represents the stock. And every system has a stock, which represent the accumulation. And the stocks are very critical for any system because they provide the inertia to the system. We have a saying that systems are hard to change. Why they are hard to change? Because system has a stock. And those stocks tells the state of a system. When we are saying there are so many under trial cases are pending, this is just telling an indicator of a state of a system. It is not telling a problem in the system. It is just telling that, okay, our pendency is increasing, our stock level is increasing. When we are saying our population is rising, the population is a stock, which we saying that our stock is rising, our state of system is changing, right? So there can be common stocks like population, something which accumulates as a population. You can always take this analogy of water tank. Pending cases, under trial cases can be a stock variable. A stock of trained professionals can be a stock. Air pollution is a stock. Garbage on the street is a stock. Number of people in this room is a stock. You can understand the dynamic, how the dynamics in the room is changing, how many people are. If you have noticed in the morning there were less people, then it increased, then it became constant. When it was the lunchtime, it decreased, and then now we have a constant, and after this session, the people will start leaving this room. So stock of the people in this room will start decreasing, which brings me to the second point. What causes stocks to change? So in this image, you see a water tank, again, example I will say. It has two flows. One is the inflow and one has the outflow. So stocks are changed by the flows, which we call as a second type of variable, the different way of looking at data, inflows and outflows. There can be numerous number of inflows, numerous number of outflows. It does not has to be restricted to these two kind of outflow or inflow. And the flows changes the stock, and it actually tells you that what is the rate of change of state of the system, how the pendency is changing. It is not determined by the pending cases. It is determined by the rate at which it is changing. So for that, if I have to ask you, what can be our flows to the under trial cases? If I consider under trial cases as a stock variable, what is the two flow that you think is changing the stock of that variable? Bail, okay. Arrest means you mean to say more cases are getting institutionalized? Okay. Then there is a disposal. How many cases are getting disposed? So that will determine your outflow and determine the stocks. Now the interesting thing here is the inflow and outflow you cannot look in the isolation. It is the difference between these two that determines the stock level. If you think I increase my disposal rate and my stock will start decreasing, it might not happen. Because it is the net difference between the inflow and outflow variable. If the inflow and outflows are same, my stock will be constant. Because as much water is coming inside, that much is going outside. If I have a same number of institutionalization rate every day and same number of cases are getting disposed, my pendency will always be constant, right? Second aspect is, what if my outflow is what if my inflow is greater than outflow? My cases will keep on increasing. That's what the dynamic is showing. What if my outflow is greater than the inflow? Then my dynamic start decreasing. So that's why I meant to say it's the net result of inflow and outflow, the differences between the inflow and outflow that determines the stock. So we might be thinking we are increasing our judges or we are doing something to increase the disposal rate, but our stock is still increasing. Why? Because it might happen your difference between the inflow and the outflow is a positive, which is keeping your stock to always rise. So that in that case, your solution, you might think why your solutions are not working, right? So if you look from this angle, so you might realize that, okay, we have to understand that differences between these two determines the dynamics. Now, third part is what determines the flows. I'll just take an example. In under trial cases, this is the stock and flow dynamics case. Institutionalization and disposal rate determines the dynamics of these things. Now, third is what determines these rates. These are called auxiliaries. Now, in this case, now case disposal has a different kind of a variables which you can say are called the auxiliary variables, which are determining and driving your systems and determining your case disposal. Here is the judicial productivity. And then The fourth is, and the most important part here is, you see all the arrows and all the feedback connection. We have to know what is the relationship between these two variables. What is, how, if my productivity is degrading, how it is affecting my total productivity. How my total productivity is determining my capacity to judgment. Do we have enough information around that? Do we know what is the relationship between these two variables? So that is the fourth kind of data information that is required to understand those structure of a system. And combining all these four elements, stock, flows, auxiliaries, and the feedback dynamics, you can actually understand the structure of a system, which can tell you why the system is behaving in a way that it is behaving. This particular technique is called stock and flow modeling or system dynamic modeling. There can be various feedback mechanisms. In this diagram, it's just showing the one feedback mechanism. If you have a institutionalization rate, if you have a different dynamics at the institutionalization rate, your diagram can become more complex, which will look like this. Now you have more variables into your data points, and now you will realize the complexity of system has increased, and I need more and more variables to understand this system. And when you run this simulation, it might produce this kind of a behaviors, which will tell you, okay, whether your how the systems are behaving. So the different lines that you see is, so there is a business as usual scenario. What if you don't do anything in the system, how it will behave? And then we are running different tests in the system, which is the red line, blue line, and the green line. What if you fill the judge's vacancy at once? What if you release the minor offenders? What if you combine these two scenarios? What will happen, right? So by combining all these scenario testing, actually you can generate whether your solution will be effective, what combination of the solution will be effective, you can find. So these are called leverage point in the systems, which determines what are the possible pathways of change that is called, that is required to understand these systems. And it also tells you that, so what happened in our cases, when we were doing this modeling, it was very painful task because a lot of variable that we have put, there is no data exist on that. It was very difficult to find, scientific knowledge and the credible knowledge about the relationship between the variable. We were talking to advocates, we were talking to lawyers. I myself was sitting into the session course and seeing the live proceeding happening, and I was talking to different people just to understand these dynamics. And so basically, I mean, by doing this thing, you can do multiple scenarios and do this thing. The point I want to emphasize here is overlooking certain structure is equivalent to say that they have a zero effect. There is nothing, I mean, every structure, every minute structure will have some effect. Either it's your choice to ignore it or it's your choice to incorporate it. You can't say it has a zero effect. So so here we are just taking two dynamics. There can be multiple dynamics. So we have to be aware about that. What are the different structures that we are considering while modeling and understanding the dynamics of a system. The final insights that what it gives is that systems thinking and dynamic modeling is useful for understanding the structures. Understanding a structure leads to understanding of functioning and malfunctioning of a system, which actually leads to better data interpretation. Third is understanding structures can tell you that you might realize that there is so much of data gap that exists in our system, and there is a need to build a knowledge systems. And then it leads to more identification of leverage point and places to intervene in the system. I just take one more example. I mean, we are open to discuss various possibilities, then how these different diagrams. This is called causal loop diagrams model, which is based on the narratives that we hear. We don't do the input of the data, but in our model, we take the input of the narratives of different people, what is in your head, which we call as the mental models. So in this case, if you have to understand the legal aid system utilization dynamics, there are various points, and you might realize we don't have a data on maybe utilization of LAS, we don't have a data on case attrition, we don't have a data on efforts by lawyers, and we might have to work upon getting those places, putting those systems in place to understand that how the lawyer workload is happening, what is the word of mouth effect is happening, how the skills of lawyer are affecting, do we have the data on the skills of lawyers so that we understand the quality of legal aid systems, and do we have this data on the feedback mechanisms like further follow-ups and all these things. And such that, so there are many data points that emerge. So this is different way of understanding the points. With this, I'll thank you and open for any questions.
Thank you, Anshul. And it's so interesting to see how the narratives are being incorporated into data modeling. And I'm sure there'll be questions on that as to how that modeling is happening. But yeah, very interesting to see how narratives are being incorporated and helps us identify relationship structures and where you need to bring in the data to make a system work. Okay, so thank you for that. Now we'll move to Mahesh. Of course, CMIE, I'm sure many of us are aware of the massively impactful work that is being done, and there was a lot of conversation in the morning about official data and unofficial data, and I think CMIE generates a ton of official data, unofficial data on the economy in various aspects through the massive amount of surveying that they do, and I'm sure Mahesh will talk about exactly how they do it and the challenges they are facing. And the reason I was very keen to have Mahesh here was for all of us who we think that large-scale surveying, we somehow feel is that thing that we want to do, but we don't do because we don't have resources to do it, which might be well true. But I wanted us to take a step before that and just get us to listen to Mahesh in terms of saying, in tracking many of these economy data, various data points on the economy, consumption, all sorts of things, how they have structured it and the challenges and how that unofficial data has been looked at by the officials or the official system itself. So Mahesh, over to you. Thank you for coming. Yes.
Thank you very much for having me here. I know nothing about law, very irresponsible at that, but I build databases, I try to measure and throw some light. I'll tell you what my experiences have been. Conducting large-scale surveys becomes necessary when you don't have enough data already available to you, and any analysis that we do in the absence of data in purely theoretical terms doesn't have the same appeal. So the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, CMI, that I represent, is fundamentally committed to measurement. If we cannot measure it, we cannot even begin to understand it. And I can see the angst in some of the people over here that we are lawyers and data and measurement is so removed from us. I can assure you it isn't all that difficult. If you can just apply our little common sense to it. It does happen fairly easily. We can build upon it. We can gradually grow databases, just make small measurements. It goes a long way. There is a lot of survey that happens in India. It has been happening for a very long time. The official survey machinery of the government of India has been awesome. Set up decades ago, it is really awesome. I have learned a lot from it. So the National Sample Survey Organization is structured quite well, was built up soon after independence. And basically, fundamentally, it set up something which was ahead of its time. What's happened over time is that it has just kind of fallen back a little bit. Then it fell back a lot more than it should have. CMI is a private organization, completely private organization. We are not even funded by some external agency. It is thousands of subscribers who fund us. So it is purely on the basis of the applicability of our work that we survive. So we are the private unofficial. I'd like to call myself private than unofficial. There's nothing unofficial, really speaking. So we are a private organization, and we got into the work of conducting household surveys, in a sense, out of frustration, to say that the official machinery is just not getting it right. And once you get tied down to processes that had some sanctity in some past times, you just don't see beyond those constraints. So, for example, we conducted surveys in India officially in normal years. So the year had to be normal. If it was a drought year, we would say, no, this survey is of no use to us. So a survey conducted in a drought year was of no use because the application was limited for just a few applications in government statistics making. But in today's world, we say we want to know what happened in abnormal years. We want to know what happened in a drought year, for example. We cannot say we do not want to know what happens in a drought year. It's important to know what happened during COVID times, for example. Similarly, it should be possible in the modern day for us to generate data on an ongoing basis and not on a periodic basis. So, the official machinery would conduct survey once in 5 years. And sometimes they wouldn't even conduct it once in 5 years. And there was no reason why you wouldn't conduct a survey on an ongoing basis, and that's what we felt in the private sector. And we went about to say, let's go out and make something which is a household survey, which is large, which is continuous, and therefore when somebody said that, before and after, I think you said that, and a continuous survey allows you to do a before and after. So if there is an episode that happens, an event happens, normally in your life, in the life of a country, you'd like to know what was the condition before the event and what happened after the event. If you're measuring on a continuous basis, you know the impact that event had. So if you do periodic surveys like the government of India even now does, you miss the real story of how change is happening. How is the legal system impacting our lives? How is crime evolving is best understood if you measure this on a continuous basis. Of course, in the case of legal systems, etc., since the government has a complete monopoly on the legal system, administrative data can be a fairly good source of knowing what's going on. But that is only to the extent that people report crimes or things that go wrong with them, with the legal, with the police system. If they don't, that system misses you out. So if we have in place a continuous measuring of the subject is the citizen, and not just the machinery, which is the legal system or the administrative system, we will get far better outcomes. We want to know how is the subject feeling. We cannot understand how good is India's health system by seeing how many hospitals we have. We got to measure that by seeing how well do people live, what is life expectancy, what is infant mortality. We have to measure the subjects and not the institutions who take care of them. So merely looking at the number of judges you have, the number of courts you have, the number of lawyers in operation will take you only thus far and no more. It's critically important that we should not forget that it is the citizen, and therefore you require to do, even in your case, a household survey. That's what we do in the private sector, to say that we are not married to doing these things only in normal years and only to meet the requirements of calculating India's GDP, but we do it to measure well-being of Indians as a whole. Now, the problem, I said that, we have been doing surveys in the country for a long time now, but excepting for the National Sample Survey Organization, which is a large respectable organization, of course, most of the rest of the survey in the country is done at cottage industry level. So somebody thinks that, we'd like to know what happened after an event. So you get up and go and say, we'll go and survey these 5 villages in rural Madhya Pradesh to understand what's going on over there. And somebody goes and does that in Chhattisgarh, in some tribal area over there. Somebody goes and does this somewhere else in coastal areas to know what's happening to fishermen over there. This is cottage industry. Now, We will have an interest in tribal people of Madhya Pradesh. We will have interest in the people of coastal India, in some cases the fishermen over there, and so on and so forth. There's no doubt about that. The problem is the lack of institutions in the ecosystem in India that can conduct these surveys well. So what happens is surveys are conducted by cottage industry who don't have the wherewithal that, let us say, the NSSO has to conduct the surveys correctly. I'll share with you some problems that people may face when they conduct these surveys themselves. The biggest problem is you first need to, the problem is actually there is a lack of what we call, the technical jargon is there is no sampling frame. A sampling frame is your entire population, all the people of this country, all the households of this country, from where you can randomly pick some people, systematically randomly pick some people through a process so that the sample is representative of the population as a whole. Okay? So it's important for us to pick a sample in a manner through a process such that that sample is necessarily representative of the total population. Right? If you pick people, if you pick only men, you're missing out women. If you pick too many women and few men, it is still not balanced. So it's important that the sample should be representative of the population as a whole. But the starting point is, do you know the population? Do you know the total population of the country? And the answer to that is a resounding no. We do not have anything that can be used as a sampling frame. The government of India does have the machinery and they can do it. And they have a fairly good investment into that. But that sampling frame is not available to private agencies. And there is no way in which a private agency can actually create a sampling frame. Now, so if you don't have a sampling frame, you are really lost. But let's step back a little bit and say that we can have a purposive survey. It's got a purpose. Or it can be a non-purposive survey. The survey that we conducted at the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy is called the Consumer Pyramids Household Survey. It is a non-purposive survey. We don't say we are doing this to measure employment or to measure consumption or to measure income. It's broad-based to measure the well-being of people of India, and therefore it is non-purposive. Now suppose you have a purposive survey. Let's make it, it's a little more restrictive. We say that we would like to know what is the impact of education on income. Very elementary. We all would like to know that if you study more, if you have better degrees, etc., you should be getting better income. How do you go about and test this out? How do you go and conduct a survey to find the impact of education on income? Seems pretty elementary, right? I mean, you should get it. But to do that, you will first have to find all those people who earn income. There are 1.4 billion people in the country. You need to find out all those people who earn incomes. So, my late mother, bless her soul, did not have any desire to the last day of her life to earn any income. My father, her husband, did all of that. So, no matter what her education was, it was immaterial because she desired not to do any employment, and therefore she wouldn't come into my sampling frame. I had to look for those people to form my sampling frame who are actually earners. You see, it's nearly an impossible task to do that. You don't even know where those 1.4 billion people are. From there, you find those people who are necessarily earning something, and then you find out what is their education. Now, if you're going to bring a sample in, you need to be able to, what is called in the lingo as a stratification, to say I should have enough people of one category against another category and so on and so forth. How do you do that if you don't have a sampling frame? So most surveys which are unofficial, which are not done by the official agencies, face the problem of not having a sampling frame. You will face the problem if you do it in cottage industry style. So what we did is we tried to do what the NSSO does. So the NSSO has a sample of about 1 lakh households. That's where they have been for decades. And what we said that if we have to get geographically more granular information and cut and slice and dice the data a lot more, the sample size needs to be a lot more. So we said, let's be ambitious, let's try and do 200,000 households. They did 100,000 households, we'll do 200,000 households. We landed up doing 175,000 households. That's what a sample is. They did the survey, they used to do the survey once in 5 years. We said, we will begin doing the survey and never stop it. They did the survey over a period of a year, usually from July to June. We said, we'll begin in January, end in April, okay? Begin in January, end in April, and begin again in May and end in August. Then begin again in September and end in December. The survey that we conduct never ever stops. So now, if you would like to know what's going on in runtime, like they call it, we know it. So what was the advantage? We started the survey in January 2014, and COVID happened in around, let us say, May 2020. And sorry. But at that time, the survey was in the field. And we knew exactly what was the impact on the households of India because of COVID, because of the lockdown. We measured people's incomes going down. We measured the unemployment rate shoot up. And when the lockdown was lifted, we saw the unemployment rate repair again to where it was before that. So we knew exactly what that spike in unemployment rate was. We measure it every week, and we found that the unemployment rate, which was running at around 6% or so before, 6.5% or so before COVID hit us, in lockdown shot up to 27%. For a labor participation rate that collapsed. So what we did is we set up this large machinery which had the capability of conducting the survey on a continuous basis. Now we have a machinery onto which, and this is the beauty of this, researchers add questions to say, let us ride our questions on your machinery to find out what is happening specifically for my requirement. Okay? So somebody would like to know, what is the impact of excessive liquor consumption on employment? Or what is the impact of addiction to substance on crime, or some such thing? We design a questionnaire for them, we run it on this, and there you go, you have the data. Now, there are some things that we have learned in this, which is, one is, I told you, the sampling frame is critically important. The second thing which is important in conducting a survey is how do you execute the survey? How is the survey executed? The cottage industry machinery, which happens by the survey being the last man who conducts the interview at the household with the respondent, is the least paid and unfortunately also very poorly trained. He or she is also fairly ill-equipped to do the work because that interviewer is hired on short assignments. The last mile is the weakest in almost all surveys, even done by large companies. Because the payment is on a piecemeal basis and for an assignment only, there is no building of human capital on how to conduct the survey. How do you tell a person in Punjab, may I enter your house and may I sit with you for half an hour, 1 hour, 1.5 hours, and ask you all kinds of questions, as against asking a similar question in Goa or Guwahati or Kochi or somewhere else, or in tribal Madhya Pradesh. How do you build that human capital that can over time understand what works, what doesn't work, what are the limitations? When do you go and when do you not go? In Chennai, when we began, we learned that don't go when the household is making tiffin. When they're making tiffin, you go there, you'll get the choicest language hit at you. Or when in some parts of Chennai in those days, when they are fetching water, there was water shortage in those days. When they're getting water, when they're making tiffin for the children, for the people who go out to work, so on and so forth, if you enter the house at that time, you had it. Don't go into the households when some important TV show is going on. If there is some season of some cricket or some such thing, sit and watch the cricket match. Don't ask them questions. How do you build the human capital for doing this? No manual tells you these things. You only learn that if you have a machinery that has gone there every time. What is the seasonality of labor moving in, moving out? And therefore, how do you do with this? So last couple of minutes. So execution, what we have done at CMI, we set up a machinery which is entirely owned by us. Build the human capital, the managers is ours, the supervisors are ours, the interviewers are ours, and those interviewers and supervisors and middlemen, there are lots of middlemen, they don't make payments in time. We became a cashless operation well before demonetization. Anyone who becomes an interviewer with us has to have an Access Bank account with us. Forget the name of the bank, but what's important is cashless operation. Weekly payments go out to them. So the execution becomes an important thing. Quality control. I heard about quality control because when you use administrative data, you have to do quality control. What we do, because the whole machinery is in our control, we say, I went to your household, Anup, and I got data from you, and then I uploaded. My supervisor asked me questions. Anup's salary is too low, by what I know. So please go and recheck. So we get that corrected or whatever it is. But then Anup said, this is my salary, and go, I won't tell you anymore. And then it goes in. And then there cannot be a quality control guy who says, no, Anup's salary is something else. He's not allowed. That problem has to be solved in the field when the interview is going on. Post hoc Windsorization of data is not done. Post hoc value judgment that these numbers cannot be like this is not done. Get your data collection right, and then there's no quality control. The quality control has to happen in real time so the user doesn't worry about any of the problems. So that's one important thing, and cottage industry cannot do that. Last thing, is all the data and the record level data, anonymize it, remove Anup's name from it, and then give it to the world. Let everyone torture the data, ask questions, write papers, do all kinds of modeling that our friend from IIT Bombay told us, not worry about the quality of the data. If we do this, if he can solve the sampling frame problem, which is by overcoming the cottage industry, if he can get the execution right, if he can get the quality control and dissemination, I think surveys are a possibility, and they can give you excellent answers. Thank you.
Mahesh, all that's left is to ask if you can add on about 25 criminal justice questions to 175,000 household survey. No, just kidding. I mean, it's such interesting stuff, and the reason was to say that if you were to imagine, I just sort of I guess fantasizing about what this would look like in a criminal justice context, if we can do it for the economy, what it would take and what we could generate in terms of, since the conversation in the morning was about generating criminal justice data and not relying on what only things that government is giving us or is allowing us access to. What are the possibilities and the different ways of generating that data. Okay, so I know it's been a long day and we're behind schedule, so I think we have about 15 minutes tops, 15, 20 minutes at a stretch. If we can keep the comments or the questions crisp, then we can get in as many. Yes, yeah. Yes, I'll come to that. Oh, yeah, thanks.
Oh, thank you. I'll keep it really crisp.
Name and...
Yeah, my name is Varsha. I am a PhD scholar and doing research on legal aid. So both presentations made a lot of sense to me. And just very quickly, as a cottage industry household surveyor of an unmet legal needs survey in Karnataka during my PhD research, I have experienced all the problems that Mahesh you pointed out, but also the same challenges that I'm encountering. So I wanted to connect both the talks and hopefully wonder if there is a case, just on what Anshul was saying. In your modeling, I think what would also be helpful, I'm referring to the utilization modeling that you pointed out. I think what is probably missing is the demand modeling. I don't think that has been done. And I think where that gap can be filled is through a demand-side analysis of legal needs, which should happen at a comprehensive level across the country. So I think I would urge CMIE to consider funding an unmet legal needs survey across the country to do, sorry Anup, I just jumped on this opportunity, to do a demand-side analysis, which will help with dynamic modeling across the country. So yeah, just a thought that there should be a demand-side analysis as well as a supply side. Thank you.
Thanks, Varsha. Ajay? Yeah. No, I think it's needed for the recording more than, yeah.
So I'm Ajay Verma, Managing International Bridges to Justice India. Lawyer by profession, so a lot of things what you have discussed is really appeals to us. There's a lot to be discussed, but to the point, what you have given, inflow and outflow. Recently, I was looking the Supreme Court's District Judiciary Conference, and they came up with the data that pendency versus fresh filing and disposal. So in some state, they say it's 100% disposal of 1 year, the filing versus disposal, but the pendency remains the same. So the data analysis with respect to the need, manpower, or the other factors which you said, inflow and outflow, if that some chart or some sort of plan comes up, so perhaps the judiciary, we can convey that it's not about recruitment of extra number of X number of judges. It is about this. It is if you have a less registration of arrest or quick disposal of your bail applications, quick disposal of the cases. How, I mean, that can be worked on, and perhaps that can be shared with the judiciary.
Yeah, no, please. Murli, I'll just come to you. Yes. Yeah. Here, the front.
Hi, my name is Anahita and I work at the Center for Social Justice. Thank you so much for your insights. Just building a little bit on what Ajay just said and also what Anshul shared in his talk. So we have basically recently developed a bail eligibility calculator. So it looks at the 14...
Sorry, did you say a bail eligibility?
Calculator. So it looks at the 14 categories in the UTRC SOBs. And we've built it with a bunch of interns, and it calculates whether you're eligible for release, and basically does this for the automatic release provisions, because a lot of it is very rules-based. So if you've done half your sentence, you're eligible for release on personal bond. All of those things are fairly sort of automated. So we've built a prototype, and the base assumption here is that if we can reduce the time reduce the time taken to identify prisoners, because as per the SOPs, as we know, it goes from the jail to the TLSA and then to the UTRC. It's a fairly sort of bureaucratic process. If we can reduce the time taken there, that could perhaps impact the inflow and outflow. So now, as we're in the process of sort of building a public argument for something like this to be taken up, Anshul's talk sort of gave us a lot to think about how we've kind of this assumption is sort of based on our experience, but how can we use data, how can we use modeling to kind of build a public argument that if we reduce this time, this could perhaps have an impact. Again, we're looking at one part, but so I guess a reflection sort of question is, if we were to kind of think about how these parts are interrelated and how we could maybe use some of the concepts from modeling to build this public argument, what would be some foundational questions for us? I'm not sure if it's probably like a larger conversation, but as civil society, we're often doing a lot of solutioning. So how do we kind of pitch this solutioning, use some of the modeling concepts that you've talked about to help us build that public argument? That's my question.
Behind you, yes. Well, I'm coming to you last.
Okay, no.
Thanks.
We worked out a deal. No, thank you, everyone. But the question, or rather the thought, is for Mahesh. And I speak on behalf of a lot of people here, including deans and VCs and professors, that as an economist, as somebody who monitors the Indian economy for so many decades, have you seen in your experience what is the intersection between rule of law and the economy? Does your data from various states over the years reflect something that says something about the criminal justice system or the rule of law in those geographies? And finally, would you be willing to be open-minded about this, that this rule of law and the intersection of economy is something that we need to start building over here? So perhaps that is something that we can look at together going forward, because that is the argument that we feel that might work. All the other arguments about rights-based approaches, about it being an essential fundamental right and all of that don't seem to be working. So can we get the business community on our side, and what could be some of the ways?
Okay, thanks.
Hello, I'm Radhika from Common Cause. Since you talked about the survey data collection process and the intricacies involved in that, I just wanted to sort of flag a little bit about how difficult it can be to collect data on social issues, particularly within the criminal justice system, in a survey quantitative format. For instance, the National Family Health Survey has a team of survey data collectors that go, and including, because some of which is not strictly a criminal justice survey at all, but it includes questions on domestic violence, etc. And those can be very, very tricky to actually carry out in a survey format, and you have to, of course, keep ethical considerations in mind before approaching such an issue. And that's something that we've also been sort of thinking about a little bit, because we, criminal justice is not simply crime statistics, right? It involves issues related to, let's say, police torture, police violence, all of that, which are, of course, there are qualitative ways of going about the data collection, but for advocacy initiatives, quantitative data sometimes works much more, is a stronger sort of argument to make. So, I don't know, it's not really a question as such, but as unofficial sources with limited capacities, how do we approach, these topics which are slightly more contentious in nature through quantitative means,
Yeah, so, and then Murli, and then Medha. And we'll come back to you. Yes.
Amitabh Kundu. I was part of National Statistical Commission, presently associated with India Justice Report. One quick question and one slightly longish question.
Yes.
One for Anshul and the other for Mahesh. Anshul, very impressive work. In fact, the structure that you presented, the model that you talked about, the flow and the stock variables interrelated, and how you can carry out sensitivity analysis to find out if you increase the number of judges, what happens. Very impressive. All that I would like to know is any empirical analysis based on the existing data and the limitations, any work that you have done which is available in the public domain. I would like to see how you have organized, because that is something very, very challenging. That is one question. Mahesh, the producer of the biggest private sector data, has a very interesting relationship with the official data system. You know, I've seen ministers, governments claiming, look, CMI data shows this. We have done tremendous progress. And the moment the data go the other way, say, this is nonsense. They have absolutely no idea. Their sampling frame is wrong. Their methodology is inadequate. So I've seen on both sides, and Mahesh knows about the kind of debate that takes place. But what I would tell you, Mahesh, in between the cottage industry and the National Sample Survey, about which you talked very loudly and proudly, you see, there are other surveys also. Yeah, you know about NFHS, you know about the survey conducted by NCAER, Ministry of Labor, right from 1950 they are doing. There are problems there, There are serious problems with these in monitoring. I know MOSUPI, that is National Sample Survey Organization, have an established, system of monitoring, controlling, and their data is much more reliable and robust. But the limitations of a large private survey like CMI does, you mentioned about the sampling frame, which is impossible for any private organization to have that kind of a sampling frame. It's not possible. It's unreasonable to expect that. And the limitations and comparison advantages and disadvantages are well in the public domain. Really, I've discussed with him and others. Let's not go into that. But I was just ask one question to Maya and others also. How come no person from the official statistical system is present here? And I think there's a good reason for it. In the morning we're talking about narratives in search of data. I think in the present government there are many people who are looking in search of data. They have a narrative well built up, right? And I've written about it. And when they find that the existing institutional data like NSS, like NFHS, like Ministry of Labor do not support their narrative. They dismiss the existing hard statistical system which has been built with the blood and labor of people like Mahalanobis, Minhas, Tendulkar, that institutional structure which is well monitored, when they do not support the narrative, they want to dismiss it. Now, I'm sure CMI and those narratives which the government is building up, and they're not even using their official data of National Sample Survey or the NFHS. They have their own portals. They have their own data collecting machinery. They hire a private consultant or some agency so that they are very much under their control. I have a feeling, I'm a user of CMI data and also the other official data, and I think it's a very useful role that CMI is playing. It's questioning some of these narratives which are being built up by a very narrow perspective with a limited data. Thank you, Mahesh.
Thank you. Medha, and then, yes, the last question. Yeah, Medha. Yeah. Oh, yeah, Murli, sorry. Sorry. Yeah.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Medha. I work with Project 39A and I head the Fair Trial program, which is an under-trial representation program in Maharashtra. I have two questions, one for Mahesh and one for Anshul. So I come from a place where at the Fair Trial program, we are capturing data of all our clients, almost in a field action research mode. And Prayas also maintains its data set on the same platform. And between the two organizations, I think we have almost about 17,000 under trials and their case data, which is dynamic, updated almost on a daily basis. What I wanted to ask is, for a sample to be validly representative of the entire universe, are there any parameters for that? Because we work with systems and we are in a place where we are representing a very, very high size of the universal population, but not the entire universe. And I mean, there is need to put out data like this. Justice Muralidhar also spoke about private organizations putting this data. So what would be a valid proportion for the data to be representative, or if there are any guidelines? Anshul, my question to you is, and we've obviously discussed this before, but while I was looking at your presentation, how do we validate these models and what kind of data? Because these are if I understand correctly, these would be giving us projections of how the systems will work if these leverage points are changed. How do we validate it to actually demonstrate that these leverage points are working in the way? Will it need actual data sets? Do we go back to data sets and see if the trends are actually falling in this? What is the logic for that? Yeah, thanks.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Shruti. I work in the Judicial Reforms Vertical at the Vidhi Center for Legal Policy. My question was to Anshul. So, a lot of the reforms that they're also trying, for example, one of the problems that people often try to resolve with the judiciary is predictive listing of cases so that there's certainty for hearings. And one of the problems that we frequently encounter is also the fact that there are unobservables that lead to delays. For example, judges are more reluctant to stop advocates from taking more than 3 adjournments, which is not the ideal case. But they also fear retaliation from the bar for if they do go down strict with the advocate. So how do you deal with the unobservables in the process of your modeling? Thanks.
Murli?
I am Murli Karnam from Nalsara University, Hyderabad. Other than in criminal justice system, to prevent abuse of data, the Britain has a Statistical Authority Act of 2007, which also has created an independent statistical authority which directly reports to Parliament but not to the executive. But still that authority is excluded from supervising the criminal justice system data. Still the data is completely under the control of Home Office in Britain. Same is the case here also. We never knew in NCRB whether there are any kind of Mahalanobis or Tendulkars. When in 1827 first criminal justice system in French started collecting data, the primary objective is having as much control as the criminal justice system. That is continues to be the case. NCRB year by year data begins with a disclaimer that NCRB is not watching for the veracity of the data because we are getting it from the states. And as a result, the responsibility of conceiving, conceptualizing, gathering, recording, processing, and disseminating whenever they want, after 3 years, after 1 year, is completely under the Home Ministry. We as researchers here, I think at best what we can do is not falling prey to the data that is given by the state. I think whether we can generate our own data or not, it's beyond our resources. I also have doubts whether everything, going by some of the responses, we no longer believe non-statistical data, for instance, right to liberty as a fundamental value that every judge believes. We no longer believe in that. We want to reduce it to the units. How many units a judge disposes? The result? Disposal of bails by the judges is not considered as a work done by the judges unless he hears a trial and gives a judgment. Therefore, handling bail cases is the least importance. So therefore I believe that we are under the impression, it seems, that reducing everything to the number and data, which seems to be, seem to believe it represents the reality, objective reality. I think it is better we should move away from that. The qualitative data is also a data. And one comment that I want to make about what you said, since there is no holiday for crime, there is no holiday for arrest. During COVID, it was only inflow, there is no outflow. There is a holiday for bail, there is a holiday for trial, there is a holiday for premature release, and everything there is a holiday. Result is, if you see the NCRB data, one can clearly divide it post-COVID, after COVID, before COVID. There is a hell of a difference because for 3 years, I think Justice Hafta Vallam once spoke about sociology of creating criminal categories. New categories are created. I think, if the speaker from America, if as we hear, I would have told him that there is no dearth of capacity for the state as far as criminal justice statistics is concerned. State has extreme capacity, what to hide, what to reveal. We can only make a difference between, there is a huge difference between ICC data and NCRB data. For instance, India crime CIA report, Crimes in India report says there are 1 lakh preventive detention under 107, 107. No, every year it shows around 1,20,000 people are arrested under preventive detention, whereas prison shows less than 20,000. What does it mean? Are there some unauthorized detention centers? I mean, this is a probable inference. I am forced to take it. Thank you.
Okay, we need to wrap this up, so I'm going to leave Anshul and Mahesh for last comments. Yeah, very quickly. Yes. If you could just take a couple of minutes each and just wrap this up.
I think all are great questions, and for the first 3 questions I would like to club. A question on developing the demand side model and your model and bail eligibility calculator and all these things. So when we develop these model, it's used by a participatory approach. So there is a tale of blind elephant and blind men. In a village there is an elephant comes and then there are all the blind men, and each blind man touches the elephant and try to say what object it is. Somebody touches the stomach and they say it's a ball. Somebody touches the trunk, it says a stick. And that's the same case with all the wicked problems. Since we have all the different agents and different motivations, everybody perceives the systems in a very different way, right? And because of those different ways they are perceiving, they develop their own mental models, and since that's why they have their own narratives. In our model, we can have as many as narratives. It becomes a constraint of the resources, that the problem is the problems are wicked and we want a fast solutions. We don't want to invest much time into understanding the problem. And because of which, what happens if you start expanding the boundary of the problem, it becomes a long research and long time consuming, which will require a lot of resources, lot of times and lot of efforts. When we started, we didn't know anything about the justice systems. We acted as a facilitator to develop, generate those narratives, talking to multiple people and everything. So the last alias dynamics that I was showing, that was just a dynamics by talking to 1 or 2 people. If in the room, if I ask everyone what is their narrative of that problem, they will come up with the different dynamics and different perspective of those systems. And those all perspective, I can guarantee that can be taken care into the model. It's just that model becomes very heavy and it takes a lot of time to put that model and run those model. Qualitatively we can do, and that's what the benefit of actually using this technique, because it involves a lot of qualitative as well as the quantitative data. You don't have to go to the quantitative stage. If you just want to understand how the systems is working qualitatively, you can just develop the stories out of it. And in fact, a lot of qualitative parameters are used in this kind of modeling. For an example, qualitative parameters like awareness, love, fear, perceptions, and all those things can be used in this model. Second to Sir's comment about, so we have a project report on this part. There is only few dynamics that we were incorporated into our model, so there is a whole report around that. But apart from that, there are other projects that we have been working, so those informations are available publicly, but we can share the report with you. Yeah.
Next time.
Yeah, so that's one. And on the validation aspect, so there are different types of validation that is done. One is called behavioral validation, where you try to see whether your model is representing the correct output, which is which whatever is data is available, but those validation might not be relevant because you can create a black box model and it will give a result which will match your reality and you see the model is correct. So the second layer of validation that we do is the structural validation, which is validation about the logic of the model, whether, and that logic validation and the structural validation is done in a participatory manner by talking to different experts, whether the narratives that we are capturing in our model are right or wrong. Then the third types of validation we do is the extreme testing validation. If you put the system in extreme conditions, right, how the models are behaving, whether it is giving a consistent results or not. So these are the broader types of, and then there is a sensitivity analysis that we, so there are different types of validation technique that we follow in this.
Anshul, I'm going to have to ask you to, yeah, thank you, Anshul.
Done?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry. So I'll quickly give answers to some of the important questions that came up. And one was intersection between rule of law and business, right? I think if the rule of law prevails, we will get better capital, better quality capital. But if the rule of law is iffy, is not quite okay, capital will still come in, but very bad quality. Business doesn't care of rule of law or no rule of law. It does a deal with whatever exists. So the worst governments in the world have also got capital. So it's not about the businessman. The businessman will make a deal with the most rotten governments of the world. What is critically important, and I think it's important for us to rephrase the question, what is the tolerance of society towards bad rule of law? So it is citizens which will matter more. When people hit the streets to say, we don't like this, it stinks, that's when change will happen. That's where we should look for the better society and equilibrium. Business cannot be relied upon. And I am a businessman, I still say that.
But Mahesh, I thought Valay's question was, is there a connection between, in the sense, well-being that you said you were tracking through the survey and the rule of law? Would that, is that, I mean, goes back to this.
Yeah, I can't answer that question because I haven't measured it. So I haven't measured rule of law, really speaking, and I would love to do that. I mean, there should be a way of doing that and get a measure of whether there is rule of law or not, and find out if well-being is associated with that. But I do not know the answer. And that was the question he had asked also, but I don't know the answer. I'm being. Would you like to measure it? I did say I'll be happy to do that. Yeah, so it's a good thing. It's a part of our well-being. So yes, I would like to do that. And qualitative information can be converted into quantitative information and used. And there were some questions about difficult questions you asked. How do you ask difficult questions? We have asked what I would call as very difficult questions. We have worked with many sociologists, political scientists, and so on and so forth. We have asked a question across India, have you raised a hand to your wife? And we have done this in Haryana. My colleague sitting over there, Prabhakar Singh. Yeah, the question was framed as to your wife, and Prabhakar played a role in saying, don't ask that question which is so gender specific, so you should ask to your spouse. And we got answers to that. And we got answers which were very, very insightful. So frame the question correctly, train your human resources that ask the questions correctly. You can ask any question on earth. So I don't see a problem in asking difficult questions. We just need to think it through like scientists would think it through. Then anything is possible. I'm now more confident I can get answers to very qualitative questions regarding anything. So brave position, but I think it's good to hold that brave position. It's possible to do it. Sir, NFHS, I forgot to mention, is probably better than NSSO as well. So, but you know, we all hold NSSO as the gold standard bearer for all of us. A very specific question you asked, what is the sample size to be for representativeness? There is no number and there is no proportion. It's also, but I'll tell you what is important over here. the sample size is not a function of the population size. Like you say that, is just 1,000 people good enough to tell us something in a population of 1.4 billion people? It depends on what your question is. If you're asking how many men and how many women, a binary which is so very clear, no gray zones easily over there, a small sample, randomly selected people will give you a fairly accurate answer. If you want to know the distribution of income, which is not a binary, and the distribution in the population is not so uniform of a binomial distribution, but is a continuous distribution, and that too skewed, it's like log normal distribution, then your sample size will have to be much larger, will have to be stratified. So there is a method to deal with all of these things. Cottage industry cannot do it, but people can do it. Thanks.
NFHS has been asking this question, whether you have been meeting your spouse in the last 3 months, for the last 20 years. They didn't ask this question, when did you stop eating your wife?
Well, NFHS goes into conducting the interviews with, women conduct the interviews, and there are like a large number of them enter the household and spend a better part of the day with the women in the household. That's an order of magnitude which is very different.
Christoph and Shreya, any last comments? Any thoughts? But a minute each, yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think what I take away here now is also what Mahesh said. So you can measure everything and convert any kind of variable into something that is quantitative. You just have to be smart about it and really carefully think about it. Yeah, and oftentimes these, like what we can measure only is possible with partnerships and being persistent. And I think we can't get around this. And knowing, let's say it like this, much of my research has been enabled by going into an institution, seeing how it works, seeing how the pain points are, and then finding solutions to that. I think there is no way around of acquiring this institutional knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to say that I'm a lot more hopeful at the end of this, because I just think we need to, as a community, find ways to come up with, unlikely combinations of people working together. Just the data modeling that you presented, it's just throws open so many possibilities in one's mind. Yeah, so I really hope that we keep these conversations going. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and for what has been such a stimulating day, at least for me. I hope the way this is structured and imagined is that as many of us as possible can be part of all conversations between today and tomorrow. So I hope many of you will choose to return tomorrow morning. We start at 10:30 in the same room. Thank you for spending the day with us. Have a good evening. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.